the grains into thinking it's time to germinate.
Okay.
So while it's in the water, 45 minutes. I got to set a timer, so I need to run back and set my clock.
Excuse me, sorry. Nope,
That's okay. It's beginning. What's starting to happen is the grains are starting to open up, and they're starting to turn the starches into sugar. That's going on in there, so it's beginning to activate. It's beginning to change. So during that 45 minutes, it's starting to do that. Then what we're going to do is we pour it back in. We raise the temperature up just a little bit more. We put it back in here for 5 minutes. Just very simply making sure that the grains are going. Then finally begins the crazy process of putting it into here and brewing just the liquid. Now the ancients wouldn't have done that. They would have just happily fermented this. They may have strained it out a little bit, but mostly they would have just drunk it through straws. So I'm going to boil it for probably about 15 minutes to really get it going. I may end up adding a little bit more water. That's why I've got the second one. I'm only doing a half batch, so it's going to be about 3 gallons or so. Then, unlike the recipe that I have written down and the recipe I made last time, I'm going to, at the very end of the boil, I'm going to add the dates. That's going to give it that'll give it a slightly sweeter date flavor rather than the probably more sour flavor. I'm going to try to have a slightly more controlled yeast. Again, the ancients would have they didn't know what yeast was. They pretty much used the dates and they left it open and anything would fall in. Whatever
spores that were
around. No 2 batches would have tasted the same.
Of course not.
Because you don't know what yeast is falling in there. In fact, in the Middle Ages, they knew something was doing it. They didn't know what, so they actually called it "God is good," all one word. So the brewer put in the water, the brewer put in the grains, later on the hops, but God did the rest. And so it wasn't until again the 1800s that yeast is actually discovered. Now, to be slightly authentic, I'm actually going to use bread yeast. I figure that's a little closer. The big problem with bread yeast is it is not designed for alcohol, so it does sort of it dies out a lot quicker than beer yeast do. Beer yeast have been bred to keep going a little bit longer even when the alcohol starts forming. So what I might
lower alcohol content?
It'll probably be a slightly lower alcohol content than that. The version I made before was I used the dates first, and then about 2 or 3 days in I added the yeast. And it fermented pretty actively for a few days, and then it calmed down. So, and that's really what a lot of it's going to be. It's going to be a couple of weeks in this bucket. Unlike the ancients, I'm also going to keep it airtight with an airlock on it, and I'm going to see what happens. Right before the end, you put the honey in, and that's what the yeast really goes nuts with. So it could end up being a fairly strong beer. It could end up being about 4. I think I don't see it being more than 6%. I don't think it'll be less than 4.
Would you put in the thing that kills the yeast and then put in more honey, or that's? I
may consider putting a little bit more yeast in, or just accepting that this is the strength that I'm going to get from this beer. I mean, obviously, beer would have varied back in ancient times, even through to the Middle Ages. You probably would have, like the first brew around would have been pretty strong. Then they actually would have reused the grain in a second beer, which is the beer that you would have drunk in replacement of like the water. That's what you would have given your children.
Right.
So the strong beer came from the first round of grains, and then you reuse them for the weak beer that you would have been like everyday drinking. So when you hear about the ancients, and like the people in the Middle Ages drinking like 10 beers a day, to be fair, it was only like 2% alcohol, but better than water.
Because the water could kill you.
Yeah. So
the French kind of do that. They water down their wine at lunchtime.
Yeah, and it probably goes back to that tradition.
Sorry.
So yeah.
I have way too much information in my head. Don't worry about it.